Marketing podcast is kindly sponsored by Nicks and Kicks, the low-calorie, no added sugar, vegan-friendly drink with a zing. At Target, we always have a fully stocked fridge of Nicks and Kicks as a healthy and tasty refreshment for the team. Try it yourself today in a Co-op or Waitrose near you, or you can buy it online at nicksandkicks.com. Will, thanks for joining us on the Performance Marketing Podcast today. So for those of you that don't know, Will Young, the CEO and founder of RAIS.io. So Will, if I could just pass over to yourself really to tell us a little bit more about your journey in marketing and more specifically how you got into customer data.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for not mentioning Pop Idol.
It did cross my mind. There was a pun in there, but
Yeah, I've put not the real Will Young on mine. Yeah, I can't even claim I'm the original because he's older than me. So, and anyway, my background in customer data. Well, as I was telling you earlier on, I started work. I guess I've always been interested in how people tick. So back from uni, and I found a job at a company that worked with behavioural data, and they became famous for, like, I guess, all the intelligence behind Tesco's Clubcard, a company called Dunnhumby, and that was, in terms of like schooling, unbelievable in terms of how it taught me to interpret data, to understand data, and how to break it down and sort of make it easier to understand for people, where you can get tripped up when you're looking at vast quantities of data and so on and so forth. So that was really fun, a really fun business to work in. I'm laughing because it was pretty much a continuity of university life in terms of how we worked hard and played hard back in those days. But yeah, it was fun because we got to work with some really big companies. Nestle was my first client, and help them understand what was Tesco's data, which was always referred to by Tesco as Dunnhumby data, which I always found quite amusing. Help them kind of get more, ultimately help them grow the category, but that meant getting more products on the shelves, understanding which promotions work better for them, and so on and so forth, all under the guise of category growth. But was often a little biased, I suppose.
That's great. I was really interested earlier. You mentioned the Tesco Clubcard. So I guess if we go back sort of 20 years, everything was done at Tesco's and other brands very much on the postcode. So if you are this person, if you live in this postcode, then you are this person. But how did your business then, or the business you're part of, elevate all of that? How did they use to transform it?
The guys that founded it were in this kind of "you are where you live" business in the 80s, and then they transformed the thinking around that to "you are what you eat," I guess, which is kind of a term now. Basically, let's look in the basket and use that to understand what kind of person you are, because it's so rich from a grocery point of view. You could see people who were buying, the cheapest products in various categories. Those categories themselves perhaps having a slightly kind of cheaper profile in terms of, a chilled versus ambient being kind of cheaper, tinned meat, for example, versus chilled meat. But then the most expensive pet food, there were these interesting segments of people that you could start to see just, in rows of data. Okay, so, well, that's fascinating. There's someone that's like massively on a budget, but they love their dog.
Yeah.
And, their dog comes first. So, and there were all sorts of really interesting and crazy stuff that came out of that. So that then fueled all the targeting around, who gets what, in terms of, coupons, etc. And I suppose all of that thinking then we've taken with us over the years to try and help the types of business that we work with now at RAIS. Just basically building profiles of customers, understanding them better, using that understanding to communicate with them better, to serve them better. I mean, that was all that Terry Leahy at the time was the head of marketing at Tesco, was kind of banging the drum about. Yeah. And Tesco did certainly back then so well, I think.
Absolutely. I think the Tesco Clubcard was sort of a bit of a pioneering project, wasn't it? It was fantastic. But when we start talking about being data driven as a brand, I'm really interested to find out what your interpretation of that is, because for me, data is there's a lot of, well, it's data's data, but where the value comes is the interpretation of that data and the intelligence off the back of it to help drive performance and marketing efficiency. But I'm sure you must come across it time and time again where brands or a lot of digital agencies just describe themselves as being data driven. But what does that mean?
Yeah, it's definitely moved on from, let's say, just collecting data, which used to be, I think, what people thought. We've got data now, therefore we're data driven. We own it, or not even own it, but we know we've got it or access to it. It's evolved beyond that, I think, to a point where to be truly data driven, for me, it means you're taking a budget or a target, and you're breaking that down into a strategy that's based upon your customers' data, and then rolling that strategy out into everyday, day-to-day activities. That middle layer, I think, is often missing, or it's sort of not enough time spent on it. In a retrospective, once every 6 months or once a year at least, it's often just people dive in, and because they can look at data to understand how their tactical activities are performing, usually on a quite granular basis, on a week to week, then often there isn't this kind of pull myself out, look a bit strategically at what's actually happening, view going on, and what does that mean we have to do. Because if you're in the weeds, it's the old adage, you can't see the forest for the trees.
Yeah.
I don't think that's, even though data is fueling a lot of that, because there's so much of it, it really, for me, doesn't truly define a data-driven business, because you're not, it's like you're being led by data, you're not driving the business using data, in a way. For me, you've got to look at data about new and existing customers, how they behave, what's going on with them. That's got to inform acquisition and retention. We'll probably get into it, but I don't think enough is done in general on the retention side of things. Personally, it's where all the money's spent. That's where all the focus is. Yeah. What you guys do, right? I mean, that's and fair enough, because you're spending lots of money, but it's also cheaper, and therefore, why wouldn't you double down on that a bit more?
So true. Just thinking about e-commerce for a second, I think, obviously just talking about being data driven, do you think being data driven for an e-commerce brand in today's no problem at all. Do you think being data driven being data driven as an e-commerce brand in today's world is a non-negotiable? Because there are so many micro events happening in e-commerce, aren't there? And you've got, first customer cohorts and inventory, and so many different channels now, from Snap to TikTok, and then your email marketing. There's just data. There's data everywhere. So to be truly successful and achieve scale as an e-com brand, do you think data is a non-negotiable, being data driven?
I do. I would say that. Yeah, no, I do, because it's there, and I know that it can be used to drive value. Then why wouldn't you do that? The problem is it's hard to do, and nobody teaches it. Digital marketing degrees, courses, mass online, whatever, they're all about, this is how you do, this is how you operate this channel, this is how you look at Google Analytics. It's quite siloed, but there isn't a kind of discipline around, I don't believe, around looking at data and interpreting it, and different types of data, and certainly not the kind of data that I'm used to looking at, which is, I guess, sort of secondary behavioural data, if you will. That's just, speak to people in our industry, it's a bit of a kind of lost art. And people coming up now, younger people, they just don't have that. It's not their fault. No one's teaching that. It makes me actually think that one of the things we want to do maybe down the line is address that. I think it's an opportunity, sort of teach people on how to actually look at data and interpret it.
100%. It's funny you should say that. Actually, I was just thinking, because we tend to find in our industry with paid search, and in particular, it's maths graduates and economics graduates who actually perform the best and turn out to be the best sort of paid search specialists, rather than those with marketing degrees. And as you say, it's just not taught. But to have a handle on that data, you do have to be you have some element of maths specialism, or to be data literate. And it is definitely an issue in the industry, I think.
Yeah, and I would say to that, the challenge then becomes, taking that person, that type, that sort of, if you like, maths type, massive generalisation, but then who, if you can find someone like that that's commercial, then wow. But that's so hard. So you typically need two people working together, and then probably somebody above them that's that's a little bit more strategic, that's been there and done that. Yeah. Possibly they've been in the more creative commercial side. So that's 3 heads. That's expensive.
Yeah, it's really a real challenge, isn't it? I think, and we're seeing it now. We're actually seeing that sort of come to the surface now with the sort of labour shortage in the industry, and demand for our services sort of outweighing supply, really. So, just coming on to first-party data now. So obviously we're in a world where, if we look at iOS 14 and how that's sort of taken away some visibility from Facebook, and now we're going to eliminate cookies from marketing. Why is a first-party data strategy and having a real hand and understanding your customer going to be so important moving forward for e-commerce brands?
Well, I mean, like right now, we've got a pretty uncertain 18 months ahead of us, I suppose. So, like, even more so now, it's important, because, I mean, no one knows what's going to happen. But if you, for me, it's going to make going back to your existing customer base and asking them to come and order again from you even more important, because they've already shown some trust to buy from you in the past. So understanding why they did that, what they bought, when, etc., is going to help you go out and get another order, one more order. So it's, this particular moment, I think, and I'm seeing that with a lot of our clients in particular, that this year, more questions being asked around, who did we retain from the pandemic? What do they look like? Are they different? What does, let's go back and look at what happened in more detail and see whether there are any pockets of the customer base that we can reactivate and so on, because it's we're definitely out of that haymaking time, and a lot of people are struggling right now. So when you struggle, that, for me, it means even more you need to understand what's going on, so that you can really thank your most important customers, turn them into advocates for your brand, get them talking. That's free marketing. It's never been easier for them to then share that through, social platforms if they're that way inclined. Being awesome on service and knowing who to serve and maybe who to kind of go the extra mile on. I know people want to, treat all their customers the same, and all that's fine, but let's face it, there are some that are, way more important than others that you could, show random acts of kindness to, and, in the hope that maybe that then gets passed on through a conversation and then another conversation and so on, because no one's doing that. And that actually comes back to this whole, the early days of, again, Tesco and the thank you. That's something that really stuck with me from Dunnhumby, the notion of saying thank you to people, and I often suggest that, why don't you say thank you, just that, in a follow-up, like really genuinely at this time, it's really great that you decided to choose us. There are lots of choices out there. It's never been easier to set up a store and sell stuff online. There's massive amounts of supply and not enough demand. So, a thank you goes a long way, because not enough people say it in general. So stand out a bit. saying it.
It's a good point. It's a good point. I think just coming back to what you said just earlier there, it is about understanding, isn't it, what is happening in the landscape. So if we look at, pandemic, as you mentioned, a bit of a haymaking time where, average order values were high and cost per acquisition was slightly low because everyone was buying online. And now we see a lot of e-commerce retailers, perhaps trends may have returned to 2019, 2018 levels of buying. So I think now more than ever, it is important that people have a real handle on the data and understand what's happening in their market. But as we move towards, what is potentially quite an uncertain time economically, as an e-commerce brand, what are the metrics that you think are most important that brands have a handle on as we head into a recession? Because there's so many that you can track, aren't there? There's LTV, average order value, customer acquisition cost, ROAS. I could list these for hours. But what are the ones that really matter, Will?
So I'll caveat some of these because I think the first one that comes to mind is customer lifetime value. But then that's like a term now that means different things to different people. So I think of that in a couple of different ways. And if you let me, I'll explain that. I think the most important customer lifetime value, or the way of looking at customer lifetime value right now, is to have a predictive understanding of it, which is, obviously it's a very, very strongly educated guess based on data. But the reason for that is that if people are looking at what I would refer to as lifetime spend, like historical, what's happened, and they're trying to understand what that is over the course of a year, then if they're going back to people who are at least a year old as a customer or older, then that, a year ago, the landscape was different. Yeah. People shop differently. Yeah. And if you go back, 2 years and look at people that then came through and they started buying through the pandemic, even more. So equally, if you made a big change 6 months ago to your product mix, or you put a price increase through recently, which lots of people are having to do, looking historically isn't going to have any understanding of that. So I think it's really important to understand the here and now, customers that you're acquiring within the last couple of months, what their lifetime value is, because you want to base your budgets, your customer acquisition cost budgeting around that, and those two go hand in hand. Not a metric that's based on data that's too old, quite frankly. So I would say that's really, really important, and it's really important to look at that. Again, I would say this on a sort of based on a knowledge of actual brand new customers, not new users, according to Google Analytics. New people, deduplicated, genuinely new. Then other metrics. So that's lifetime value, and of course you can look at that over different horizons. So genuinely people want to get payback over 12 months from acquiring the customer, but then understanding, what it increases to beyond that, I think is important too, because if you can then, if you know that maybe you're not going to get payback over 12 months, but it's between 12 and 24, fine. You can make that call really in a really educated way. So we typically look at it 12, 24, 36, sure. And beyond if necessary. Then you've obviously got stuff like AOV, you mentioned AOV, right? But the behavioural customer metrics like average order value, frequency, but new versus existing customers, always that for me, because people, I think, jump to conclusions about how AOV increases typically when customers order, for the second, third, fourth, this rise in AOV. And I've seen clients build business models on that, and then we look at the data, and actually it's the opposite that's happening. Yeah. And then really obvious reasons why that happens, but they didn't know that. So I think those are really, really important. And then I was thinking about your point on the recession and sort of levers that need to be pulled to kind of drive trade through that time. Obviously, price and promotions are really key. Price elasticity is often, it's a difficult one, and often there's not enough of a change to really kind of get a read on that. But if there's a term such as promotional elasticity, I think that's a really interesting one to look at to understand, the minimum amount you can give away for the same result in driving uplift, in effect, from new and repeat customers too. Uplift on an AOV point of view. So if you're playing with, and I see it more and more actually, people playing with kind of random percent off, like 17% off, whereas people typically do like 15 or 20. But so playing with that and then having something that can give you quickly feedback. Well, how's that done? How do flash sales perform versus week long versus extended? I think that's not a single metric, I suppose, but it's really about understanding what you stop, start, and continue in that environment. And I suppose the other one, because I think of data more once the transactions happen, typically, because of my background and what our platform looks at. But also, I think it's really important if you're in e-commerce to look at things like the sort of add to cart rate, because that's a real indicator of people coming in, looking at the price and going, maybe not. And so on a product basis, looking at your product view to add to cart, I think it's going to be even more important if people aren't doing that. Sort of try and optimize as much as you can, as well as all the obvious ones. But those are the ones that I'd be most sort of, I suppose, keen to understand in a downturn.
That's really interesting, and I think just thinking about those metrics now, there are lots of different tools that help us measure those. Some third-party tools, Google Analytics, even some in-platform, Shopify, Magento, that will give us that information. But for me, there are lots of issues here that arise because sometimes with Google Analytics versus Shopify, you're seeing different numbers. There are discrepancies, duplication errors. There's so many things that can go wrong and create confusion. So why for you, why is it important to have a single source of truth? And what would you use as a single source of truth?
It's a single source of truth just makes it easier, doesn't it? There is also, I think, a kind of trend towards do it for me, automation, which is why it's becoming increasingly hard, I think, to get talent that are good at interpreting data, because I think people want just the answer and believe that AI can do that. And maybe it will at some point, but right now I don't see anything that's really doing that, that's got the ability to truly think like a human. So having at least everything in one place is going to save time, loads of time. Having a really solid, trustworthy foundation of data is going to mean that you're more likely to use it, because again, I see lots of people, exactly as you said, Shopify tells me this, GA tells me that, and then a decision doesn't get made because you're like, what do I do? What do I trust? So try and get something that you can trust and buy into, because typically GA, it can do if you set it up right, I suppose, but typically there's no refunds going through there.
Exactly right.
And it's not capturing everything. This is obvious, right? But and with Shopify, you've got everything, but then I still kind of scratch my head a little bit why Shopify, like the session type metrics are different. Exactly. And I read something recently on Shopify's help docs that sort of gave me the answer, and I was pretty horrified by it. So it's just to save that time, I think. And I see lots of, I know businesses that spend their Mondays gathering data, and then businesses can become quite comfortable doing that. So that's 20% of your week. You're just on a data gathering exercise, and that sets in.
So Will, this probably leads quite nicely into your platform, RAIS. Now, RAIS is a customer data platform, not to be confused with tools like Glue, probably more of a business intelligence tool. What's the difference between your customer data platform and business intelligence tools such as Glue?
Okay. As I see it, a customer data platform should do a number of things. Things that make the data trustworthy, coming back to that point, make it usable as a foundation, sort of as a non-negotiable. So there are customer data platforms out there, or purport to be, that are, if you will, they're technologies that there's probably a massive team that are just building endless amounts of integrations, and what they are is basically a mechanism just to pool data in the hope that there might be commonalities that allow you to stitch that data together. Great, that's fine, but you typically would need someone fairly technical to then create value from that.
Sure.
The likes of Segment, let's say, really powerful. But typically, I see being pitched to a slightly larger profile business that might have people to do that. In terms of BI tools, then, they are super important ways of visualizing data that sit on top of a Segment or a platform like ours, quite frankly. So they, again, would typically have connectors to data, but would require the user to know the nuances of those data sources and understand the pitfalls of combining them and so on and so forth. So they are a clever way of, again, pooling data, albeit perhaps with fewer integrations, and then just simply visualizing it. So making that the way, sort of interpreting easier, if you will. Which the likes of Glue do, and others. Zoho Analytics, something that we sometimes use. Google Data Studio, super powerful. I'm a massive fan of that. But it's really built just simply to visualize data and make it easier to use, and actually, really important point, distribute and control the distribution of to stakeholders within the business, which is a key part. So our platform, as a customer data platform, has to and does make sure that the data is usable to start with. And what do I mean by that? I mean, from a GDPR point of view, that the data that we have is kind of bulletproof from a data retention standpoint. That's going to depend on the business that we work with. So some might have different policies, but we need to make sure that we can have an automatic anonymization process run to make sure that specific customer records are only held for a certain amount of time, let's say. That's I'm diving straight into quite a dry point, but it's something that I worry about a little bit, because I don't think enough people look at data retention as a policy, quite frankly, and there are ways to manage that. Duplication is a massive one. Again, going back to the kind of the Dunnhumby Tesco days, they had a single household view. We have a single customer view. And that means that, yes, if you've got two different email addresses, but you're the same person, and you use both of them for different reasons, we will merge the records together, because you are one human being. And it's therefore more valuable to know about your habits as a person rather than you as a contact, which is what makes us different from customer data platforms. I'd say purport to be like a Klaviyo or others that unify around the email address, and there is no incentive to do anything other than that because of the way they charge around the volume of email addresses and sends. They want more email addresses. So let's prepare the data in a way that makes us understand that this actually is a really valuable customer, not three individuals, two of which have bought once and one who's bought 3 or 4 times. Put them all together, they suddenly become a VIP, for example. And that does depend on what you sell, so the extent to which there's duplication and how long you've been in business. But there will always be some level of duplication. So it then comes down to the extent to which you care about that as a business owner. And when I look at people in the eye, it's very rare that people say, I don't care about it. Because certainly our clients want to do right by their customers. So a CDP has to have that clean foundation, and then it needs the ability to, I believe, sort of enable two use cases. One is around tell me something I want to know about how customers behave. So an understanding, which might be based on what's happened on the back of a campaign or something like that, or just something that's more strategic. And the other one is then how can I use that? So how can we distribute that information to other platforms to augment CRM as a discipline? So how making sure that we send this information to a Klaviyo, to a Facebook ads, to an SMS platform, to Zendesk, all the channels that you operate CRM as a discipline through, basically. And I suppose back to the first use case, which is around understanding, would then be also distribute to BI. So distributing insights and intelligence to a Google Data Studio or others. So it becomes the brain, if you will, that uses other technologies out there to its advantage.
That's really interesting. But I guess just coming back to RAIS, because I feel like we're getting into what makes RAIS different, and we're starting to talk about the platform. What, in your mind, what are the USPs of RAIS, or why could a direct-to-consumer or e-com brand come to you? What problems could you solve, and how would you solve them using your platform?
I suppose touching upon some of the things we talked about earlier, which would help you guys, I guess, around this whole lifetime value piece and acquisition cost, and can we afford to spend more to acquire customers? Are we missing opportunities? You don't want to ever miss an opportunity if you've got some money to invest. So for sure we can help with that because of this whole understanding of lifetime value, because we do have, and we've developed actually with some government funding support, a predictive algorithm that allows us to look at lifetime value, which will pick up changes in behaviour when there has been a price increase and so on, or product mix changes if you've introduced a new category. That's often something that definitely changes CLV. So from an acquisition point of view, even though the data is about customers and what they, behavioural, and therefore there's huge plays around retention, it can definitely be used to support acquisition, and looking at that on a channel basis too. Also getting an understanding of why performance is flat or decreasing, or because I speak to clients sometimes and they're panicking, and actually my job is to sort of alleviate their fears often, because they're often looking at data over too short a time frame, let's say. And okay, they might have missed that week from a budget point of view, but actually it isn't a trend yet. And it might be that every fourth week there's an issue, and it's around payday, or it's the week after payday, or whatever, I don't know. So looking at the data definitely, is helping to interpret data is a kind of add-on to the platform, if you will, from our point of view, that we can help with. And I think the other thing is around time, because there is so much data. People are either scared to use it, frustrated because it takes so much time to use it, then don't really know how to use it when they've got it, if they are spending time, because they're getting confused. So we definitely help with all of those things, whether that's then collecting it and putting it in one place, then distributing it to tools like Data Studio, or then helping them understand on a quarterly, monthly, biannual basis what it means. That's definitely part of the RAIS service.
Great. That's great. And just thinking about the type of client you work with, because I'm getting, in terms of business size, because I'm sure there are some businesses that are incredibly small, that this level of data interpretation may not have that requirement yet, and businesses that are so big that they have a massive in-house team. Where does RAIS sit in terms of its customer profile? What type of businesses do you work with, and do you want to work with?
It's interesting because we've got some quite small clients, and they all share. There's a common thread, and that's they've got to answer to somebody. They're not typically, our small clients aren't typically founder-led and organically growing. They're typically answering to investors.
Yeah.
And we help them a lot with the time, because they're small. They've got a small team. Time's their enemy. So when it comes to doing reporting to the board on metrics that board members typically ask for, all of that's on a plate. So that's really
small.
it could even be sort of
Headcount or revenue.
I think of it in terms of revenue. So could be still doing under $1 million in terms of turnover. Yeah. Actually, growing, but maybe approaching $1 million. We've certainly got clients that are maybe doing half that actually, but they've got they've maybe worked in bigger businesses, so they understand the importance of this stuff.
Makes sense.
And they know that their stakeholders do too, because stakeholders are typically in bigger businesses, or and they're asking questions that these guys are like,
Don't know the answer.
Yeah, I need help. There's one client that's like, can you tell me what the repeat rate is, please, of our customers? Like, yeah, and it takes seconds for me to, and I show them like, here's the screenshots again. That's how you do it. To 100 million turnover type businesses that who have might even have in-house analysts. A lot of our clients are, I would say, in this sort of 1 to 20 million turnover, don't have in-house analysts, have an appreciation of what data can do for their business. Maybe they answer to someone, maybe they don't, but certainly as a senior team, someone's asking questions, and so there's some strategic vein running through there, and therefore, like this whole appreciation of what data can deliver. And the bit bigger than that, where there are analysts in play, it's that comes back to time. So it's just, here's something on a plate, so you don't have to spend your time extracting data. I think I saw a kind of pie chart once of the data scientists' working week, and 90% of their time is extracting data, writing queries to get data, and 10% of it was analysing it, or 9% was analysis, and 1% was recommendation. And it's like, well, it shouldn't be that. It shouldn't be that. It shouldn't be that. It should be, we want to give clients, coming back to that Monday, we want Monday to be about, let's look at what's going on and make some decisions, rather than, well, let's I get into my routine of gathering data, copying and pasting, putting it, and then putting it into some slides, and then I'm ready for the meeting now. And I get to the meeting and I'm like, oh, okay, I hadn't even looked at this, and now I'm looking at it thinking, oh, what does that mean? And we're all going, well, what does that mean?
Sure.
Like, wow, that's massively inefficient. I should know what it means before I go into the meeting, and should be going in saying, guys, this is happening. This is what I think we could do about it.
Yeah.
And if you've got that as a kind of straw man, then that opens up debate, and then then it becomes massively productive.
Problems get solved. Yeah. That's great. I wish we had more time, because I feel like we could really get stuck into so much here. It's been really insightful. But Will, if anyone listening wanted to get involved, either reach out to yourself or wanted to, give the RAIS platform a crack, e-commerce or D2C brand, how would they get in touch with you? Are you on LinkedIn, or is there a website they can visit?
Yeah, we're on LinkedIn, but the website's probably the best place to find us. It's RAIS without the E, so RAIS.io. And you can get in touch with us there. You can book a 30-minute chat to kind of chew the fat and see how we can help. Very open to that, and being a sounding board, no commitment. There are people out there that I'd say don't have wills in their life that I'm very happy to help answer questions. I do that quite a lot actually, and it's a bit of karma comes back eventually.
Perfect. 100%. So that's RAIS.io. Perfect. Will, thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate it, and speak to you soon.
Yeah, great. Thanks.